The shock hit Evan the moment he opened the workshop door. The room felt wrong before his mind caught up. Empty hooks lined the wall like missing teeth. The air smelled the same oil, dust, old wood, but the weight was gone. His tools were missing. Not misplaced, gone. The lathe his grandfather helped him restore. The torque wrenches he saved months to buy. The custom saws he guarded like secret saw vanished. Evan stood still, heart racing, staring at bare boards where his future once lived. He walked the room fast, then faster, as if speed could undo the truth. Drawers yawned open, shelves stripped clean. The bench was untouched, but that only made it worse. It looked like a body without a soul. Its hands trembled as anger surged, sharp and hot. No thief broke in. No lock was forced. Only one explanation fit, and it made his stomach sink. Inside the house, voices drifted from the kitchen, calm, normal. Evan stepped in, eyes locked on his parents. His mother froze when she saw his face. His father exhaled slowly, already bracing for impact. Lucas sat at the table, backpack by his feet, jaw tight, eyes glued to the floor. "Where are my tools?" Evan asked. His voice was steady, but it felt foreign, like someone else was speaking through him. Silence answered first. Then his father spoke, measured and low, like a man explaining a difficult but sensible choice. "We sold them." The words landed. Heavy. Evan waited for more. A reason. A mistake. Anything. Lucas needed the tuition. His father continued. "The deadline came up. We didn't have time." Evan stared at them, disbelief turning into something colder. "You sold my tools." His mother reached out but stopped short. "We meant to tell you. This was for his future. For the family." Word-family-burn. Evan looked at Lucas. His brother didn't meet his eyes. Shame flickered there, mixed with relief. College brochures sat on the table, bright and hopeful. Evan felt invisible beside them. "You didn't ask me, Evan?" said. His father frowned. Defensive now. "We knew you'd say no." The honesty cut deeper than any lie. They had decided he was expendable. His dreams were optional. His work was currency. Evan left the room without another word. He didn't slam doors. He didn't shout. The anger settled deep, quiet, and dangerous. That night, he lay awake, replaying the moment over and over. Each memory sharpened the betrayal. The tools weren't just things. They were proof that someone believed in him once. His grandfather's hands were still on them in his mind. And now strangers owned them because his parents chose his brother over him. Morning brought no clarity, only resolve. Over the next few days, Evan moved like a ghost through the house. His parents spoke carefully, as if softness could erase what they'd done. They explained again and again how hard the choice was, how proud they were of both sons, how Evan would understand. Someday. Lucas avoided him entirely. The house felt smaller, tighter, full of unspoken blame. Evan stopped arguing. Silence became his weapon. He watched, he listened. He remembered every word. Late one evening, he returned to the workshop. The empty space echoed his thoughts. He traced the bench with his fingers and felt a strange calm. The building itself was still his. Years ago, his grandfather had signed it over to him quietly, believing Evan would need a place of his own someday. That memory surfaced now with sharp clarity. A plan formed, not wild, not cruel, but exact. This wasn't about screaming revenge. It was about balance. If his parents believed taking was justified, then so was reclaiming. He told himself he wasn't hurting anyone. He was protecting himself. Still, doubt crept in. He questioned whether leaving was running away, whether making them feel loss made him no better. But every time guilt rose, he pictured the bare walls and heard his father say, "We knew you'd say no." That settled it. Evan began packing. Quietly, he gathered papers, saved messages, proof of ownership. Each step felt like pulling thorns from his skin. His parents mistook his calm for healing. They smiled more. They relaxed. That only deepened the divide. One night, his mother knocked on his door. "Are you okay?" she asked. Evan nodded. The lie tasted bitter, but it kept the peace. Back in the workshop, he stood alone, imagining it empty of even the bench. The lights turned off, the door locked for the last time. The thought hurt, but it also freed him. For the first time since the betrayal, he felt in control. The choice was no longer about punishment. It was about leaving a place where his worth was measured by usefulness, not respect. As the sun rose, on the day he would act, Evan felt steady. The hurt was still there, but it no longer owned him. His parents believed they did the right thing. His brother believed the price was fair. Evan believed something else. He believed that if you let people take from you once, they would do it again, and this time he would not be silent. The days after the betrayal were a blur of quiet observation and careful calculation. Evan moved through the house without speaking much, his mind always spinning. He watched his parents and Lucas, noting their routines, their habits. The moments when they thought he wasn't paying attention, he could see how they justified themselves in every glance, every word, every small action. To them, the sale of his tools had been necessary, a sacrifice for the family's future. To Evan, it was a violation, a line crossed without consent, and he could not forget it. He spent hours in the empty workshop, walking along the bare walls, touching the workbench, imagining what it had been and what it could be again. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and oil, memories of past projects, of nights he had worked late, of small victories no one had noticed. Every corner, every shadow, reminded him of what was taken. His heart burned not just with anger, but with the hunger to reclaim control over his life. It wasn't just revenge he craved, it was justice. He knew the law, the paperwork his grandfather had carefully arranged years before. The workshop was legally his. Every piece of equipment that hadn't been sold was his property. That fact gave him a quiet confidence. His parents had misjudged him. They had underestimated his patience, his intelligence, and his resolve. Evan began planning meticulously. He considered how to move the workshop without alerting anyone. He noted the times his parents left the house, the moments when Lucas was at school, the days when the streets were quiet. He made lists, mapped out steps, imagined scenarios where he was caught hand, then adjusted his plan. Every detail mattered. The plan wasn't impulsive, it was deliberate. At the same time, he wrestled with his conscience. He told himself this wasn't cruel, that it wasn't about hurting his family, it was about reclaiming what was rightfully his. Still, doubts surfaced at night. He imagined the look on his parents' faces, the shock, the fear, even the anger. He imagined Lucas struggling, feeling betrayed. Could he go through with it? Could he carry the weight of their disappointment along with his own anger? But the memory of the empty pegboard returned with brutal clarity. He remembered how he had opened the door to find nothing, how he had traced the walls with shaking hands, how the room had felt hollow. That emptiness drove him forward. It wasn't just about taking back tools, it was about reclaiming his dignity, his space, sense of worth. He started small, with paperwork and keys. Each document he copied, each key he stashed was a piece of armor, a preparation for the final act. He moved silently through the house, careful to avoid drawing attention. Careful not to reveal the storm building inside him. His parents mistook his calm for acceptance, but the fire inside Evan was growing, fueled by every glance they cast toward Lucas and every excuse they offered for their betrayal. Evan's parents spoke to him occasionally, their voices gentle, trying to soothe the invisible wound he carried. They praised him, told him they were proud, offered affection as though it could erase the debt they owed him. Evan listened, nodded, smiled politely, but the act felt hollow. He couldn't forgive yet, not fully. Forgiveness had to wait. Control had to come first. Late nights were the hardest. He would lie awake in his room listening to the quiet house, imagining scenarios over and over. Each time, the plan evolved. He would take what was his, but he would not act impulsively. There was no satisfaction in rash action. He wanted to act deliberately, to make sure nothing went wrong, and to make sure that when he finally moved, it was complete, precise, and undeniable. The emotional weight was heavy. He felt anger, yes, but also a strange thrill, the sense of reclaiming agency in a house that had made him feel powerless. He realized revenge was not a single act, was a series of choices, each one tested by his moral compass, each one weighed carefully. Every day he had to ask himself, is this necessary? Is this fair? Is this the boundary between justice and cruelty? Evan began imagining the day he would move out. He pictured the truck waiting, the tools packed carefully, the workshop emptied. In silence, he imagined standing before his parents, calm and resolute, watching their expressions change as they realized he had claimed his space and his rights. That vision steadied him, gave him purpose. It wasn't just revenge, it was a reclamation of identity. He also considered the consequences. Would they hate him forever? Would Lucas resent him? Perhaps. But Evan realized that staying silent, accepting what had been done, would destroy more than relationships. Would destroy him. He could not live in a house where his value was measured by convenience. He could not allow anyone else to dictate the worth of his labor, his dreams, his life. Preparation became obsession. He moved quietly, efficiently, with purpose. He packed personal items, tools that had been overlooked, important papers, and small mementos that had been forgotten in the shuffle. Each item represented a fragment of his autonomy, and as he collected them, a sense of control returned. With each piece, the fire in his chest settled into something sharper, calm, focused, unrelenting. His parents continued to speak to him with care, unaware that their attempt at reconciliation only reinforced his determination. Every apology, every explanation, every gentle nudge to forgive or forget only reminded him of the betrayal. It was not that he could not forgive eventually, but first he needed to act. He needed to draw the line, to mark the boundary where his life was his again. As the final days of preparation approached, Evan felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The house, once familiar, felt like a cage. The workshop had been his sanctuary, and now that sanctuary had been violated. He had to leave, but he also had to make sure that leaving was complete, that it sent the message he needed it to send. He was no longer the passive son, the overlooked brother. He was a force of quiet, measured consequence, and he would not falter. The night before he acted, he returned to the workshop one last time. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the empty floor. He ran his hand along the bench, imagining the projects that would never be completed. They're under his parents' oversight. The silence pressed down, and for a moment he felt the weight of the choice he was about to make. But the thought of reclaiming control steadied him. Evan understood that this was not just about tools or money or college tuition. It was about respect. It was about autonomy. It was about the principle that no one could take from him without consequence. In that quiet, moonlit room, he made a silent promise. Tomorrow, he would move. Not in anger, not in revenge alone, but in deliberate reclamation of his life, his space, and his dignity. When dawn broke, Evan was ready. Every plan, every preparation, every thought of consequence had led him to this moment. He knew the path. Ahead would be difficult. He knew emotions would flare, words would be exchanged, and relationships might fracture. But he also knew that nothing would feel better than taking back control over his life. The betrayal had been severe, but the opportunity to act thoughtfully, decisively, and with purpose gave him a clarity he had never known before. The plan was set. The workshop would be his again, and this time no one would decide its fate but him. The storm of conflict had reached its peak internally, and the final act, the move, the confrontation. The reclamation would soon follow. But for now, Evan held the silence and the tension, ready to turn thought into action, knowing that the next day would change everything. The morning arrived, cold and clear. Evan woke early, the house still silent except for the faint hum of distant traffic. He moved with purpose, carrying the weight of nights spent planning, calculating, and imagining every possible outcome. The rented truck waited at the curb, empty and ready. Its clean metal sides reflected the first light, like a mirror holding the possibility of freedom. Evan ran his hands over the door, feeling the finality of what he was about to do. He stepped into the workshop one last time. Sunlight poured through dusty windows, illuminating the empty shelves and bare pegboards. Every corner of the room held memories, each tool that had once hung there a ghost of past victories, late-night projects, and lessons learned. He traced the workbench with his fingers, the grain of the wood rough beneath his palm, and for a moment he allowed himself a quiet breath of sorrow. This place had been more than wood and metal lit, had been a sanctuary, a proving ground, a home for his ambition. Evan began to load the tools he still owned into the truck. Each item was placed, carefully, methodically, with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the act 1,000 times in his mind. Every wrench, every chisel, every drill carried a fragment of his identity. He stacked them neatly, aligning edges, checking each item twice. The work was physical, but the act was symbolic. With each tool he moved, he reclaimed a piece of himself that had been stripped away. His parents stepped onto the porch, drawn by the movement. Their expressions were a mixture of confusion, fear, and anger. His mother's hands shook slightly as she called his name. Lucas appeared behind her, eyes wide, a mix of disbelief and accusation on his face. "Evan, what are you doing?" Lucas shouted, "You can't just take everything." Evan paused, holding a wrench in his hand. The moment was electric, filled with tension, thick and suffocating. He looked at his brother, then at his parents. He saw fear, frustration, and regret flicker across their faces. The room seemed to shrink around them, the air heavy with unspoken words and shattered expectations. This was the moment he had imagined countless times. It's the moment when revenge could either be completed or abandoned. "I'm taking what's mine," Evan said, voice steady, calm, and deliberate. "It's all mine. The workshop, the tools, everything. You made your choice, now I'm making mine." His father stepped forward, hands raised. "Evan, this isn't necessary. We're just trying to help Lucas. You don't have to." Evan interrupted softly. "You don't understand. You never asked me. You just decided. You took. Without consent, and now I'm taking back control." The silence that followed was heavy. Every heartbeat felt loud. Every breath was measured. Evan's parents said nothing more, words failing them. Lucas's face was red with emotion, anger, betrayal, and helplessness mixing into a storm. Evan felt a pang. This was the part he had dreaded. Seeing those he cared about suffer even slightly for his actions. But the memory of the empty workshop, the walls stripped bare, the absence of the tools he had earned, steadied him. He picked up the last of the tools, placing it carefully into the truck. The act was symbolic, deliberate. Every item represented years of effort, proof of his labor and a reclaiming of identity. His chest tightened, not with triumph, but with clarity. He realized that this wasn't about hurting anyone. It was about asserting his right to exist as his own person, to protect the space that had been his sanctuary. As he closed the truck door, he felt the finality of the choice he had made. There was no turning back. The workshop, the tools, the space that had once been violated were now fully under his control. He looked at his parents and Lucas one last time. Their expressions were raw, honest, and human. No one smiled, no one yelled. They simply understood. In their own way, that boundaries had been drawn, and actions had consequences. Evan climbed into the driver's seat. The engines rumble a quiet affirmation. He drove away slowly, the workshop disappearing from view in the rear window, but the memory of it intact in his mind. Freedom wasn't the absence of pain. It was the control over one's own life. That thought gave him a calm satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that this action, though necessary, would leave ripples. Relationships might strain, bonds might fracture, but autonomy had been restored. The drive was quiet. Yvonne replayed every moment in his mind, not out of regret, but reflection. He considered what his parents might think, how Lucas might respond, and how he himself had changed. The anger that had fueled him was still present, but it had transformed into resolve. This was not vengeance for its own sake. It was reclamation, was justice defined by his own terms. By the time he reached his new space, a rented warehouse nearby, Evan felt a shift. The workshop was empty, waiting to be rebuilt. The tools were arranged neatly in the truck, each one a symbol of endurance, effort, and self-respect. He began unloading, moving methodically, setting up benches, arranging machines, creating the sanctuary again. Each piece found its place. Every step a meditation on control and rebuilding. As the day turned to evening, Evan stood in the center of his new workshop. Sunlight filtered through the windows, highlighting sawdust in the air, casting long shadows across the room. He ran his hands over the surfaces, feeling the texture of wood, the cool metal of tools, and the weight of responsibility. This was his space now. Not because he had fought with fists or shouted, but because he had acted deliberately, thoughtfully, and with clarity. He reflected on the confrontation with his family. He realized that revenge had never been about inflicting. Maximum penance had been about restoring balance. Taking the workshop was not cruelty. It was a boundary. He hadn't broken them. He hadn't destroyed their lives. He had merely asserted his right to exist as an autonomous person. The lesson was hard but necessary. When violated, reclaiming control is not selfish, it's survival. Even as he worked, setting up the first bench, organizing tools, and preparing for the projects he would finally complete, Evan felt a mix of emotions, relief, satisfaction, and lingering sorrow mingled in his chest. The action had been decisive, but it was not simple. It's the human cost, the fractured relationships, the tension left behind, a lot of it lingered. Yet the clarity he had gained made the weight bearable. He knew that he could rebuild, not just the workshop, but himself, by nightfall. The workshop was partially arranged, a skeleton of the sanctuary it once had been, but enough to begin anew. Evan stood in the center, breathing deeply, feeling the quiet triumph of measured action. He had reclaimed what was his, not through chaos, not through violence, but through determination, patience, and resolve. The act of leaving the house, of taking what had been denied, had been his turning point. He understood that revenge had been about more than tools or property. It had been about dignity, respect, and the right to make his own decisions. Standing in the empty yet familiar space of the rebuilt workshop, Evan felt a sense of freedom that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with agency. He had drawn the line, taken control, and faced the consequences of his choices without fear. The day ended with Evan alone in his new sanctuary. The workbench gleamed under the fading light, tools arranged neatly, ready for use. He felt neither triumph nor bitterness, only quiet resolve. Revenge had been executed, but it had not consumed him. He had acted, reclaimed, and now he could begin the process of rebuilding not just a workshop, but a life defined on his own terms. In that moment, Evan realized the most important lesson. True power isn't in retaliation, it's in reclaiming control, asserting boundaries, and moving forward with clarity. He had done all that. The path ahead would be challenging, but it was his own. And for the first time in weeks, he felt at peace, ready to build again.